I just want to learn a little bit about what your long-term vision for FTX is and how you plan to use that to leverage your influence on traditional finance, so to speak. I'm reading this headline, for example. 29-year-old crypto billionaire Sam Bankman-Fried said in a recent interview that buying Goldman Sachs is not out of the question. What did you mean by that?
Someone got a little bit misquoted. I think the question is like, might we buy a traditional financial firm? I think my answer is yeah. I mean, probably not Goldman Sachs, but might buy something. It is true that we are looking at traditional finance, and we're looking at ways of porting over a lot of the lessons that we've learned from crypto to traditional finance, in the same way that we ported a lot of the lessons that we learned from traditional finance into crypto. And what are some examples of that? I think the biggest is the disintermediated model, right? If you look at what it takes for an American to buy a stock right now, an average consumer, they're going through 10 companies from start to finish, right? Between the mobile apps, the brokerages, the clearing, the custody, the stock loan, the dark pools, the PFOF firms, ultimately the exchange. And there may have been a time when that was an important setup because the exchanges couldn't also build mobile apps. With the advent of the internet, we're no longer in that time. And what happens when you intermediate so much for the average consumer? Well, first of all, when most people send orders on equities, they are literally not allowed to know what the order book is. They would have to pay millions to tens of millions of dollars per year in order to get the market data, to know the order book that they are sending orders to. That's not great, right? It should not be the case that only sophisticated trading firms are allowed to know the market data that they're trading into. That does not create an equitable playing field. On FTX and in most of crypto, all of our market data is completely free to the public. Anyone who wants to know what our order book is, you go to ftx.com and it's right fucking there. Our API is open to anyone. When you look at connectivity, firms are spending hundreds of millions to billions of dollars to build out, beam splitters and colos in all of these different exchange centers, right? In order to get the fastest connection possible. For us, we say where we are in AWS, anyone can connect to it with the same, the same connection as anyone else. And so, we're trying to bring equal access to financial markets to players rather than a system that favors, only the most sophisticated firms. And I think that when we look at traditional markets, I think that some of them could benefit from some of that as well.
Yeah, interesting. And this ties into the last segment of our interview perfectly, which is applications for cryptos and DeFi outside of just investing. So we've talked about traditional finance. Before we get into that, actually, what do you think of the latest upgrade for Bitcoin Taproot? Do you agree with the direction that these upgrades are taking place?
I think most of them are improvements. I think most of them are marginal improvements. But I think that part of the ethos of Bitcoin is not having it overhauled. At least that's what many people who are excited about Bitcoin feel.
You can just make forks, right? You can just make
right. And I mean, that's what Bitcoin Cash is, right? For people who wanted a larger overhaul of Bitcoin. But in the standard Bitcoin core thread, most of the adherents want continuity with maybe some tweaks. And so I think that's mostly what we're seeing.
Okay. Now, let's talk about the metaverse. I like to get your take on how cryptocurrencies can be integrated into the metaverse. It's no secret that industries, big companies like Facebook, now it's called Meta, are headed in that direction. So how do you plan to partner with some of these tech giants?
Yeah, I mean, one obvious thing is back-ending into them for crypto services, for crypto investing and trading. Also for NFTs, we have an NFT portal, and a lot of places are looking to add that, from video game studios, ticketing, and much more. Payments, especially cross-border payments, are a huge pain right now. Crypto rails can help make that easier. There are countries that are seriously looking at cryptocurrencies as alternate fiat currencies. Obviously, El Salvador is one of those. I think more generally, anywhere that you see information or finance flowing between two different platforms, blockchain does provide a nice way to have a standardized protocol for that.
Yeah. And what is your involvement with, let's say, the esports industry, which is a huge industry, by the way? The video game industry is larger than the music industry and movie industry combined. You recently renamed a stadium FTX Arena, so you're and you're involved with some sports teams as well, esports teams. So you're going into that space. And I mean, generally speaking, esports and cryptocurrencies, it seems like a logical marriage. How do you plan to be that bridge, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, we'll see what happens. But we're talking to a number of players in the space about, NFT support, about cryptocurrency support more generally, fund on-ramping and off-ramping for payments inside of it. But I think NFTs might be the first place that we see this get big in the gaming industry.
I used to play a lot of games, not so much anymore, but I can just imagine myself playing an RPG and I'm trading my items, and instead of using an in-game currency, I'm using some sort of token. I mean, is that the next step?
I think that absolutely might be. I think that's something that some of these players are taking a hard look at.
Yeah. Finally, effective altruism is something you've proposed, something you're a big proponent of. Tell us about that idea.
Yeah, it's an idea, and it didn't come from me originally, but it's basically the idea that, look, doing good is good, doing more good is better, and when you're trying to think about how you can have positive impact on the world, there are ways that you can try and quantify that, and you can try and compare different options and see which way allows me to do the most good, right? And so where it started was like, all right, if I'm going to donate to some charity, maybe I'm going to donate to some health charity, which will save the most lives per dollar? And it identified some global, developing world health charities, anti-malaria charities, anti-systemiosis charities that were able to save lives for single-digit thousands of dollars each. Mm-hmm. And that just means your money can go a lot further when trying to do good for the world. Since then, it got a lot of feedback from the world of like, are you forgetting about systemic change? I think the answer to some extent was yes. And I think that over the last 5 years or so, the effective altruism community has thought a lot about what are the things that might really impact the long run future of the world. What are the things that might control what we look like 1,000 years from now? And what could we be doing today to put those on the right track? I think, one example that's become topical recently is pandemic preparedness, right? We've proven as a society, we are not prepared for a pandemic. And the next one could be worse. And as much as we're trying to fight COVID right now, we should be thinking about what happens if there's a future pandemic that is more deadly. How can we get ready today so that we don't have to go through something much worse than this?
Okay. Well, I know your recent partner, WonderFi, is interested in providing DeFi to areas of access that previously weren't accessible, basically bring DeFi to the masses, right? They're providing a service that allows more people to enter the space. How do you see that partnership fitting into your overall philosophy?
In general, I'm excited to see that happen. And I'm excited to see, the unbanked get real access to finance. It's not that hard to get access if you're wealthy, if you have a ton of spare time, if you have, a lot of assets that people are excited to interface with. If you don't mind paying 5% on all your transactions. But if those don't happen to be true, the current financial system does not work for everyone. And, giving open access to that, I think, could be really powerful for the less well-off, for those internationally, for those in countries that don't have well-built out financial systems, and for anyone looking to innovate.
And finally, with WonderFi, what is your next step in terms of tapping into, let's say, emerging markets and developing regions around the world?
I think the hardest piece of this is interfacing with the traditional financial ecosystem. So when you look at an emerging country, right, what's the hardest piece of getting cryptocurrency adoption there? It's finding a good banking rail so that people can get their funds between the traditional system and the cryptocurrency ecosystem. I think that's one of the next big frontiers.
Excellent. Sam, I want to thank you so much for coming to the show today. Happy Thanksgiving, and I appreciate your time speaking with us on Thanksgiving Day. Thank you.
Thank you.